Well, hello and welcome to the new season, the winter season at Rosie's Preserving School. And we're going to kick off today with marmalade, of course. I'm going to launch straight into making because that way we might actually get it all done in the session. And as we go along while it's cooking, I'll then go through, all the background, the history, the whatever that I need to tell you while we're waiting for it to cook. And that'd probably be the best way. So I hope those who are cooking have cooked their oranges the day before. I think most of you have, because most of you have got in touch with me. And so you've got some nice, cool, cold, squash-looking oranges in your pan, no doubt. If we can just have a look at my pan here. I don't know if you can see there. Mine, I'll wiggle it so you can see the water sloshing about. They don't look great when they're cooked like this, but my goodness, it's much easier to handle than trying to do all of this raw. I've only ever done that once when I was 15, and I swore I'd never make marmalade again. But actually, once I found this way of doing it, it's much, much easier. Now, those of you who've cooked and have got your fruit at this stage, can you look at where the water is in the pan? Don't worry about the oranges, but look how sort of deep the water is. Mine is just over halfway up the oranges. I can't really give you a measurement because we need to use this water that was from the recipe. And if you've cooked away more water than perhaps you should have done, or it happens because it evaporates, but some people cook with the lid on, which helps that. But just add some more cold water so that it comes up about halfway, more than halfway up the oranges before you start, and then we can forget about it. Right, so I'll move this back so you can see hopefully what I'm doing. I've got my jug here, and I've got a jelly bag, which I'm going to line the jug with. You can do this with muslin or, whatever you want to use, but I just find it's easier both for doing this and also cleaning it up because it rinses out so easily, to line a jug with the jelly bag. Then we're going to take the oranges and the lemon out of the water, and I put it on a dish like that, so that when we cut them, the juice doesn't go everywhere. It can go back in the pan. So just lift them out and give them a shake to get them as dry as possible. Put them in your dish or plate. And then the water goes down alarmingly, which, as you can tell, is why I told you to have a look at it while the oranges were still in there. So hopefully your oranges are all sort of squidgy like mine, lovely and soft and tender. So you can take out the little knobbly bit at the end, and over your plate, cut them in half. And then we'll have a look at the inside of one of these. And you can see the structure of the Seville orange is not like a sweet orange at all. There's masses of pips, more pips than anything else really. There's some flesh, and then there's the white pith, which was white around there, which is now cooked. Now, if you were cutting that in half raw and trying to take out the white pith, the membranes and the pips, it's very hard. It's hard work to get it out because it's quite tough. But you can see when I do it now with a spoon, use a teaspoon and just go around and scrape out the flesh into the jug, into your bag or muslin, whatever you've got. And you can do that in one big piece. Leave as much pith around the edge as you can, It's all cooked now, lovely and orangey, so you know you don't have to pick it all off or anything like that. It's all more orange in the jar. So just carry on doing that. Do all the halves. Make sure you get all the pips and all of the sort of membranes in the middle. You don't want those in the marmalade in this instant. It's only the case with Seville oranges because they're so industrial, really. So if you cooked it long enough, it should be lovely and soft and easy to do. Sometimes they kind of get stuck and one side gets cooked more than the other, and the white pith still looks a bit white. Don't put those in. You'll have plenty of what you need in there without kind of putting in something that's not quite tender. But you can see it's very, very easy to scrape them out, much quicker than doing it raw. Smells lovely as well. Another couple to go. Some of you were emailing me about if you've frozen them, doing it from frozen. You can cook them at this stage from frozen. They just take a bit longer, that's all. Just to make sure that they get to this lovely soft stage. Anything that you've got that you don't want in the marmalade, like the stalky bits at the end, just put them in the jug, because that isn't going to end up in the marmalade. So just put it in there. Right, I've got to the lemon now. The lemon is equally squidgy, but it won't be as firm when you cut it in half, because it's not as tough as the Seville oranges are. So do that over the bowl, over your dish, and it will probably deposit a lot of liquid in there. It won't have as many pips, but do the same thing. Just pull all that flesh out into your dish. Now I've only got one lemon because they were absolutely enormous, and for the number of oranges I've got, I didn't want to have that much lemon by having two that size. I usually make double this amount of oranges when I make a batch, but it would take us too long to cut it all up. So now we're going to cut up the orange slices, and you can find your own way of doing this. I don't know if you can see enough there. Right, with that, so I'm all sticky. So you've got your half. You can cut it in half and put one half inside the other if you want to, if you've got a nice sharp knife, and then cut it across. You can cut the pieces to your taste. If you want it really finely shredded, you can do that, or you can do it nice and chunky. When I was making for customers, they wanted it fairly chunky, so I sort of kept doing it like that. I don't like piling it up. I'm quicker if I just cut across one at a time. But however you find to do it, I tend to vary it actually because I get bored cutting up. I'm surprised that nobody has invented a bit of kit for actually doing this job yet, but I don't think anyone realises how much marmalade is made in this country. There used to be Victorian bits of kit, but they're all quite rusty now, and quite lethal, wearing blades and all of that. So just keep cutting. Make sure you don't get the kind of tough where the orange is attached to the tree. You need to sort of cut that bit out, and I'll show you that when I get to one, what that looks like. It's different from the other end. So like this, the bit that has the stalk, if you cut one side of it, and you can just cut that up in a minute, and then where the stalk is inside, it's got some strands of membranes. Just cut a V shape out to take that out. You don't want those in your marmalade. So it ends up, you take that piece out of it, all intact, and pop that in your jug, in your bag, and then just keep cutting. Now, while we're cutting these up, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of marmalade, because it does seem improbable that somebody discovered the bitter oranges and thought, I know, I'll make a preserve out of them. Didn't quite happen like that, but you would think, having tasted these once, that nobody would ever have done anything with them ever again. But they were discovered first in China. And like so many things of this nature, the Chinese used them first as a medicine. Now, this is about 300, 400 years, about that sort of long ago. So very, very early on in our history. And when they found them, they used them as a medicine by just literally bashing them into a paste. And the poor unfortunate people, I suppose it was, sold to them as, the medicine. The worse it tastes, the better it is for you. And they were just sort of, I don't know what they did with all the pips and everything, but they certainly, but of course it was good for them because they were full of vitamin C. And it probably did make people feel better. Now, about the same time, over in India, which isn't that far away, actually, from where the oranges were first discovered, at the sort of base of the Himalayas. By the way, once you get a pile of peel, it can just go back into your pan, so you've got a bit more room. In around about the same area, the Indians discovered these reeds growing, and they investigated them and cut some, and they discovered once they were cut, the reeds oozed a sort of sap, which when it got into the air, solidified into crystals, which at that time was quite a magical thing to happen. They didn't know they'd discovered the first sugar. And these were sugar canes, not reeds really, but anyway. So they too used the sugar as a medicine, and people were given the medicine, crystals, to make them feel better. Which again, in certain circumstances, it probably did, and they probably got the best end of it because they didn't have the bitter oranges to contend with. But it wasn't long before the two actually it was quite a long time. It was about a 1,000 years before the two finally sort of got together, and the sort of paste that the Chinese came up with, mixed with the sugar, became a sort of snack, really. It was used by travellers. They would take it on the journeys on the trade routes, because at that time the Arab Empire stretched right down to the Chinese border and right the way up into Europe, into Italy and to Venice, where of course, you know, all the trade was centered, and in Europe. And this food was sort of carried as a handy snack for their lunch, because it was portable and it was very good for them. But they didn't realize it was the vitamin C in it. Now, the thing I discovered in sort of researching all of this, you know, last year we learnt about pectin, and that plants have pectin in every part, every cell of their being. The pectin is there in different levels, in different plants at different times and different parts of the plant. You know, i.e. it's not an exact science. Nevertheless, with the orange, the pith and the pips and the skin have as much pectin as the flesh. And this is why it's important for us to put the pips and all the sort of innards of the orange that we're not going to use in the final marmalade, but it needs to be cooked in it so that you get the benefit of that pectin. It's also true, and I think we examined quite thoroughly the benefits of using every part of a lemon last year. It's also true that the whole orange has high levels of vitamin C. So whether you're using the skin or the flesh or the zest, the vitamin C is not just in the juice, nicely sort of compartmentalized, it's in every part. So this, of course, by cooking the oranges first and making the whole orange nice and tender, it means that pectin giving pith, the white bit, which is now orange, is going to stay in the marmalade and help it to set, which is, I think, why this particular way of making it is so successful and less tricky than making it from raw oranges, because you've got much more of that setting pectin actually in the end product. We're nearly there. What I generally do, because when I make marmalade, usually, as I say, I have twice as much as this recipe, and I put an audio book on or something like that to listen to while I'm doing it, and you can get quite lost. You know, you can get into a sort of bit of a rhythm with it, and it doesn't seem quite so tedious as I understand here slicing everything by hand. All right, this is another top. So lovely and juicy and easy to do. And of course, it means once you eat the marmalade, every bit of it is lovely and tender. It's my last orangey bit, then I've just got to do the lemon. Now the lemons are have a lot more of these sort of strands, these membranes inside, and sometimes at the end where the stalk was, if you cut round without cutting all the way through, just go through the skin, you can pull out the end with most of the strands still attached. If that doesn't happen, you can, when you cut it in half, just scrape your knife along without taking too much of the pith away. Just take those membranes off because they do tend to be quite tough. I've got a white bit there, which I'm not going to put in the marmalade, but I'll put it in the jug. And then just cut the peel up the same as the orange. And put it in the pan. The other end isn't quite so bad, but if there are any big pieces of sort of stringy bits, then just take them out. Question? Yes, you just cut the lemons in the same way. Just slice them up the same amount, same thickness as the orange, and it all cooks. When you eat it, you can't tell the difference between the two. Right. That's all in the pan. And going back to your dish, you need to rescue all that juice and put that in as well. Make sure you've got everything in. Give it a bit of a mix. Right, how are we doing? Those that are cooking, are you okay? Good? I'm just going to rinse my hands and then we'll. I didn't quite persuade Joe to rearrange the kitchen so that the hand washing was right beside me, so I've still got a dash across the kitchen. Brenda's saying she's seen marmalade pith cutters on eBay. Oh, vintage ones, yes. No, I don't think they're worth buying, Brenda. I bought one. I think the photographer's got it as a prop, but they tend to be really rusty inside and, you know, quite gruesome. But they clamped to the table with a bit of a hopper, and then there's a handle, and you keep going like this, or the scullery maid did probably, and all the peel drops out the other side. But I don't think it would work with this anyway, because our oranges are a bit too tender. So are we nearly there for me to carry on, or would you? Yeah, okay. Rachel's all right. Oh, right. So what we're going to do, now it depends what pan you've got. If you've just, I don't mean this the way it sounds, I don't mean if you've just got a saucepan, but if you've got an ordinary saucepan without any bits on it, like these handy sticky out bits here, then you're going to need something like a wooden spoon or something like that to go through the handles of the jelly bag to hold it over the side so that it doesn't disappear into the bubbling contents of the pan and empty all the pips into your marmalade. So you want to sort of secure it somehow. And I find just a spoon or something like that handle does the job. You're going to put your bag of bits or your innards and your pips and everything into the pan. And I'm going to hook it around the pan handle there to hold it. You absolutely don't want to be hooking pips out of the body of the marmalade. Put any juice that's already dripped through the bag in as well. And then we're going to turn on the heat and cook that for about 15 minutes. So that the all of the pectin and everything that's in the inside bits can come out into the juice that's already in the pan. So make sure you push the bag down into the water, and so that it's submerged, and that can happen. And we'll get organised. What I didn't tell you with the discovery of the oranges, it sounds great, doesn't it? Oh, they were first discovered in the year 350. You know, oh, that's so long ago. But they found fossilised oranges that are 11 million years old. And it's just astonishing, and you can't, you know, compute that really. But they found them, you know, sort of the cross section, so they know they're oranges, and so they've been around quite happily, seeing to themselves all those years until we come along to manipulate them and use them for our own devices. Of course, when the bitter orange paste met the sugar, that changed things slightly because people could use it as a food. And of course, the people that travelled on the trade routes were the kind of people that spread all these new innovations around the world. We think we've got communication, but they effectively spread the news of different foodstuffs and different cultures and different ways of doing things. So I think we've got another. Should the heat be on? Yes, we need to be heating the mix to get the pectin to come out into the water. So they'd be travelling, however they did it, on camels or pack horses or on foot, however they travelled, and they'd need food. And you couldn't sort of take enough food with you for the whole journey. So they would buy food locally. And this is the way that things were discovered and spread. So this pasty, sweet paste travelled from the edge, the Chinese borders, up through the Arab Empire, and people adapted it on the way. It's like us adapting recipes. They used what they had. By the time it got up to North Africa, the culture there, of course, was quince, and they didn't have oranges, not at that point. But they did have lots of these. The quince, I'll show you there, and they cooked these. They didn't use sugar because they didn't have sugar. They used honey, and so they would cook it into a paste. As we know, we've still got that around today, the membrio paste, but they would cook it right down. And in fact, they used it as a bit of a medical aid as well. It would be cooked and cooked and cooked and cooked until it had pretty much dried out. And it would be in a solid brick. I mean, this is quite a lot further on in the timeline, but it would be sort of about this size, like this bag of sugar, and quite solid. And it would be sliced and served at the end of dinner. So the main meal of the day, everybody would be handed a small slice of the quince, and it was used as a digestive aid to help you digest your food. By the time it got up into Italy and Spain and so on, it became, then they realised that they could actually, that's where the first sort of jams were made, because they had this quince and sugar which was cooked. They never thought about cooking anything else. They didn't realise what it was about the quince that made this sort of gel, if you like. And because they didn't know about pectin or the reactions of everything together. So it was quite a game changer. And in about the 1400s, that's when the whole thing started to change and people started to experiment and use other things. And once the oranges arrived, which is around about then, about 1400s, they were used in the same way. And we get more like the things we're used to today. Still quite solid though, because it was a portable way of carrying them. The more solid they were, the easier they were to transport. You know, they didn't want to have heavy clay pots or anything like that full of, you know, a jam. So it's quite fascinating how the different cultures have ended up in the same place, more or less at the same time, but with different ingredients. And it's quite interesting reading the history of it all. But this is heating up nicely now, so I'm just keeping an eye on the clock and give it about another 10 minutes. Talk a little bit about the sugar again. Just white granulated sugar is fine. It seems a lot of sugar that goes into marmalade, and I suppose it is a lot of sugar. But you've got the water. It's not just the fruit. You have to allow for the water as well. So we're going to have 1.5 kilos going into this mix in a while. I'm going to put the scales on. Still having to stick with tape malal. I still haven't managed to get back to silver spoon or Whitworth's yet. So haven't seen any. 1.5 kilos. Bit of stir around. This is when it really starts to release the lovely marmalade smells of the oranges. I think the common sort of story that marmalade was invented by a lady in Scotland in about 1700, because she sent her husband out to get bitter oranges, or sweet oranges, and he came back with Seville oranges, and she had to do something with them. It's a bit of it's an old wives' tale, really. She was a preserve maker, and I think she knew what she was doing, but she's always been credited with inventing marmalade, but it's been a much slower process than that across many, many years. So, but we'll leave her be. Right. Who says, Rachel, I need to come and visit St Albans. The Morrison's at the end of my road always has mountains of silver spoon. I wonder why that is, Rachel. I mean, it's so hard to get. It must be to do with the deals that the buyers have or something, you know, as to why sometimes, I mean, a lot of it's the harvest, and Silver Spoon and Whitworth definitely have to work with their allocation. They don't have the buying power to just take the whole harvest. But of course, I'm not sure Elizabeth has made this one. I think she's going to watch the recording, but she's in California, and Tate and Lyle is probably closer to her than buying Silver Spoon, which is British. So it just depends where you are and what you use. And as I've said before, it doesn't matter what you do or why you do it. I don't police it. If you want to buy a different brand, buy it for your own reasons. If you want to just buy the cheapest one, do that. You know, Aldi and Lidl and places like that often have deals. So sugar is inert, keeps forever. So if you see a deal, buy as much as you can and stash it somewhere so it won't get damp, and use it up when you want to. Nothing will happen to it. So by all means do that. It's roaring away now. I'm going to give another few minutes. So if you haven't already done your jars, you can rinse them out and put them in a low oven, about 50 degrees, 150 to 100 degrees, upside down, to drain and dry and warm up, ready for when the marmalade needs jarring up. I mean, we're a bit of a way away from that at the moment, but by all means, you can be doing that whilst you're waiting for things to cook. Just get organised so I can take the pan off. Orange oil was recommended as being naturally revitalising and energising. The scent is naturally uplifting. Yes, if you're having an icky day, I agree with you. It's certainly that. It's very astringent, isn't it? It's got a lovely clean smell to it, and so who's that? Sue. It's only just started boiling, so I'll be lagging behind. Okay, so well, you'll be fine. Yeah, I'll just answer. And Megan, yeah, just give it about 10 minutes in all once it's boiled. You can watch me do this next bit, and then when you get to it, you can do that. Because I've got to kind of try and finish, if possible, to time. So it's not complicated what we're going to be doing, so you'll be fine with it. I'm going to lift the pan off the heat to take the bag out, just so it's lower down, and oh, it's hot. So what I'm going to do Lift the bag up and let it sort of drip a little bit. And I'm going to use my jug and I'm going to hang it up over here. If I've got a hook, I've got a hook. This one, I think. Yeah, there's a hook. I've got drawers now, you see, I'm too organised. And I'm just going to let it drip for a bit. And if I remember, I will then put that into the marmalade. Usually I find it after I've finished, and then I wasn't any point dripping it. But somebody asked me about whiskey. Don't put that in yet. I'm going to go through that. So you can put it in, but not now. If you put it in now, it would just evaporate and do nothing really. So I'm going to put the sugar in now. That's why I've taken it off the heat, so that it doesn't all go straight down and burn onto the bottom. Don't need to be, pouring it in slowly. You can just sort of dump it all in and then start stirring it to start dissolving it. It's the same deal, except that you've got a lot more liquid. So with jam, you don't usually have this amount of liquid, and it's a lot harder to get it to dissolve. But it won't entirely dissolve like this. You need to just get as much as possible melted into that cooking liquid. Put it back onto the heat. If you remember from the jam, you need to stir it. You'll hear it gritty and you'll feel it. But as the heat gets back into it, it will start to melt, and you need to stir until you can't hear it and you can't feel it, basically, until it's smooth. So make sure any that's got into the crease of the pan where it reaches the base gets mixed in. As soon as it's smooth and you can't hear it and you can't feed it, then leave it alone. Remember, stirring things cools the mixture, and you need now to be getting the heat up into it. We need to achieve a rolling boil, just like we do with jam, but we're going to cook it for a lot longer. It needs about 20 to 25 minutes to actually get to reach a setting point. So you don't want to keep stirring it in case it cools down. And actually, it's so much more liquid than jam. It's not generally the case that you can burn it onto the base of the pan, I say. I don't think I've ever burnt marmalade onto a pan, to be honest. That would need some serious negligence of, walking away and forgetting you're even cooking marmalade and doing something else, for about an hour. So I'll show you how it kind of changes during the cooking. You can already see that it looks more glossy, and that's the action of the sugar. It's got some foam, which is also from the sugar, nothing to worry about. You don't need to start scooping it off or anything like that. But you do need it to boil. And you've got your sugar, you've got the acid from the fruit and the lemon juice, and you've got masses of pectin from the fruit, and you've got heat. And those four things have to come together in the right proportions, in the right way, for the chemical reaction to occur that creates the set. So we need to kind of let it do its thing. I'll move these out the way so we've got some more room. Plate for later, won't need it yet. So once it starts to boil again, and actually this sort of amount, if you're not used to making marmalade, is a good amount to make because it gives you plenty of room in the pan. You haven't got to worry. I mean, when I'm making it, it's sort of boiling right up here, and it's a bit nerve-wracking at times. So, and you can't walk away and leave it. You know, you have to be there with it. So, this is a good amount to make. Make less, but more often until you're entirely used to what you're doing. This is coming up to the boil, and we're going to leave it boiling. You might need to turn it down slightly as we go along if it's going too mad, but generally the hotter you can keep it, the less time you'll have to cook it for. It's basically the rule. As I've told you before about the elderly chap I had whose wife sent him on the course, and because she'd had years and years and years of terrible marmalade from him, and so she paid for the course for him to come for the whole day, and it was a nightmare because every time my back was turned, he turned it down again, and it took us about 4 hours to actually achieve making the marmalade. So you can see it bubbling up now, and you can see the foam starting to form. Don't worry about that. Just leave it be. But you can see, I hope, in the pan, the foam is very, very white. Now, if you don't get time to sort of be cooking at the same time as me, as it goes on through the cooking, that foam will go a creamy colour and thicker, and that's an indication that, you know, you're close to it being okay. So you can see the rolling boil, it's covered with bubbles all the way across. I'm going to turn it down 1 notch, so I've gone down from 6 to 5 on my hob, just to maintain that very fast, busy bubbling. If it starts to rise up, I'm here to, at the very least, if you can't do anything else, lift it off. If you've got gas, you can turn it right down quickly, but with electric hobs, you can't do that. So if you think it's going to boil over, then, and that you'll see it coming up really quickly, then just lift it off. Have your surface protected, so that you can do that without a lot of drama. You don't want to be flapping with it because it's obviously very, very hot. So while that's doing that, I'll keep an eye on it. And you asked about whiskey. I've got some whiskey here I'm going to put into some of mine. I'm also going to put some ginger into some other jars. And if I'd had some black treacle, I thought I had some, but I haven't, I would have finished off adding some black treacle to what was in the pan, because that's very, very nice to make like an Oxford marmalade with the black treacle in it. I think that's fine. So with the whiskey, what we'll need to do, just before we put the marmalade in, you put about between teaspoon and a tablespoonful into the jar, and then you put the hot marmalade in, then you put the lid on, and then all the whiskey stays in the marmalade. It doesn't have time to rise up through it and evaporate, because as soon as heat hits alcohol, it evaporates. Now that's great if you're doing something where you want to cook it out to get the flavour into a casserole, say. But if you want it in your marmalade, that's where you want it to be. You don't want it floating around the kitchen. So don't be tempted to put too much in, because it will alter the set and the marmalade won't set. So between, you know, it's hard to say. It's sort of, if you've got big teaspoonfuls, that's enough. But just put in about 5 ml, I would say, is plenty, so that you don't alter that set. So you can do that. You can do that to as many jars as you want to. You might not want it in every jar in a batch, or maybe you do. But make sure if you've got a mixture in your batch to label it so that you know which one's got what in it. So that's that. And then I'm going to, in a minute, chop some ginger, some of our preserved ginger. And it's the same deal. If you put it in the pan, you'll find it all drops to the bottom, and then the last jars that you jar up have all got the ginger in it, because unless you keep mixing it as you're jarring it up, then that's what will happen. So I chop it and I put it into the jar, and then I put in the marmalade. Now it's quite difficult to get the ginger to disperse in the marmalade. You can tip it upside down, you can, you know, do all sorts of things, but sooner or later it will probably drop to the bottom again. But the ginger flavour will be in it, and you can sort of fish around when you're eating it to get some ginger if you want to. It's quite a nice addition. So I do that jar by jar. But if I want to then have some of these sort of Oxford style marmalade with the dark, with the black treacle in it, I jar up all the other jars, and then what's left in the pan, I stir some into that if I'm not making a whole batch of it. And you can mix that in about a tablespoonful, and then do that last, and then you don't add black treacle to everything. That's the way I found it's easier to do. Now, when you're cooking this, I can hear now where it was sort of not roaring, but you could hear it, the kind of rush of everything. Now it's quieting down. It's sort of changing, and you can see the bubbles will look thicker. I'm just going to give it a bit of a stir, otherwise the peel does just tend to stick on the bottom. And the foam around the edges there is getting quite creamy looking from the oranges. How are we doing for time? I'm going to leave that. I'm just going to go through some while that's cooking a bit longer. I'll move that out of the way. I've got some other marmalades here that I've made that you might like to have a look at while we're waiting for that. Sue's asking if the volume of liquid is important. We measured it before we took out the oranges. Yeah, you start with the cold oranges and the water, and you cook them. Before you start sort of actually making the marmalade, you want the liquid to be about a third less than it was when you started. You don't want it much less than that, otherwise you won't have enough. But it's very, very difficult to measure or weigh, or, you know, once you've done the cooking. So I've found that if you use the full amount, which was 3 pints, 1.8 litres, and then see where that comes to, and then before you start cutting up the oranges, you check that you've got about a third less than when you started cooking them. You could weigh it if you can sort of work out all the differences, but to be honest, you get to kind of know if there's enough and if it's okay. So let's have a look here. This is the one we're making. which is the chunky Seville marmalade there, which is just the clear gel, orange gel with the orange peel in it. That's the one we're doing today. And it may or may not have whiskey in it. It may or may not have ginger in it. You can put other liqueurs in. You could put brandy. You could put Grand Marnier or Cointreau, the orange liqueurs, if you want to. Whatever floats your boat. I've made some clementine marmalade there, if you can see. Now that's not so much of a clear gel. That's more like the modern marmalades that are being made, which are more of a paste with the peel in it. This is the one I'm eating for breakfast, which you can see how it ends up. Because you're putting the whole fruit in, all of the flesh, because there's no hard membranes or anything like that, it's much more of a pasty sort of marmalade. It is delicious, but it hasn't got the bite that Seville orange marmalade has got, and I do miss that, I must admit. But it's very nice, and it's set very well. It's very easy to make. I made it in the same way. I cooked the clementines, not for as long because they're softer. I did them for about 15 minutes or so, cut them up and put them in, and carried on the same. Now, this is a kumquat marmalade. Again, hard to see any definition in the jar. It's quite sort of solid looking. And just open it. You can see there. And kumquats are a funny sort of fruit, really, because they're quite tiny, but they do have quite a few seeds in them. But Elizabeth, that is in California, gave me a good tip. She said you're supposed to take all the seeds out, but if you just cut up the kumquats and cook them, you don't have to cook them first. You just sort of cut them up and put them in the water and cook them from cold. The seeds rise to the top and you can sort of scoop them off. I used a clean tea strainer, actually. I had loads of kumquats left because I had to have 2 kilos, I think. And so I didn't want to make them all at the time. So I've bottled them there in the water. So they're ready to go for marmalade. They'll sit on my shelf. And if I want to make some, I made my own marmalade, you see. I put the kumquats in the jar. And Elizabeth, I'd never made kumquat marmalade before. And she said it's nice with, again, an orange liqueur in it and maybe some sprigs of thyme or rosemary in the top as well. Makes a nice flavour. So that's those. And over here, these guys, these are bergamot. Now these are citrus fruit we don't see very much here. You can get them in this country in sort of posh greengrocers and online. But they are the most, if you know, Earl Grey tea has got bergamot in it. And when you cut them open, that's just what it smells like. It's the most wonderful fragrance. I don't smell of it. The skin doesn't smell of it. But I made bergamot marmalade with them. And that's it there. Again, not quite such a gel. It is a gel, but it's not as clear as the Seville. So give my mixture another stir just to check it. And I can feel that this is getting to the right stage now, because when you first put the sugar in, it's all very, very liquid. But now with this creamy foam, when you stir it, it feels thicker. It doesn't mean it's sort of jammy, it's just that its structure is changing. I'll just do the last one, which is lemon and lime in there, which is I'm writing a marmalade book, so these will all be in that book. But lemons were cooked in the water in the same way to soften them, and they were chopped up. The limes, I had 6 limes, and I zested the limes. I just used the zest. Putting the whole peel in is not successful. It's very, very harsh and very industrial, I find. So if you use just the zest, you get a lovely liminess to it. And also the juice. Squeeze the halves once you've zested it, put the juice in, and it's a delicious flavour. The last citrus one I've still got to do for the photographer is a 3-fruit marmalade. So if you haven't got any Seville oranges, I can't get any, a 3-fruit marmalade is very, very similar flavour and hard to tell the difference. And Louise is asking about blood oranges. So you just do it in the same way, Louise. Cook them, chop them up, but you take out the pips, but you can use a lot more of the insides because they're not as harsh as the Seville oranges. So makes beautiful marmalade. So with Tracy's asking about this, with the 3-fruit orange marmalade, I put grapefruit, 1 big grapefruit, I've got it here ready to do, 1 big grapefruit, a couple of oranges and a couple of lemons, cook it in the same way, chop it up and deal with it in the same way, and it makes a delicious alternative to Seville. You can use any combination of citrus fruits. You can use the same recipe, treat it in the same way. It might not take as long to cook as the Seville because the fruits aren't as I say, as hard and tough as the Seville oranges. I'm going to take mine off the heat now because I think I'm going to try it. You'll have to kind of judge how much longer you might need to cook it for. We'll see how we get on with this. I'm not saying it's ready, but it sort of looks it. You can see the lovely creamy foam on there. That is going to disperse. If I just do nothing, it's melting away because that foam is actually the activity of the heat. It's all the bubbles created. And now if I give it a good stir, most of that will disappear as it does with the jam. Right. I'm going to leave that there because, as I've said before, jam and marmalades with bits in, you can't jar them up straight away because it will rise to the top, the peel. While I'm waiting, and I won't be able to wait long enough for it to be cool enough, I don't think. I'm going to chop a couple of pieces of the ginger. Oh, I'm getting out of the jar. I generally go on sort of one piece of ginger in each jar, just to make sure everybody gets some eventually. So you need to chop it not too finely, just in little cubes. And that is going to go in that jar. I'm going to put some of my marmalade on my saucer just to see if I can get some sort of result for you. That down there. going to chop this one. Of course, if you want to, you can do whiskey and ginger. So you could put some whiskey in and some ginger and, you know, have a combined flavour. If you're making for your own use, you can put other things in like cranberries or something like that. It's not actually the legal definition of marmalade in this country if you're selling you know, via shops and so on. It's only citrus fruit, but if you feel like putting something else in, well, go for it, you know. And I think the other thing you could do is maybe soak some raisins in rum and then stir those in at the end. But again, don't overdo the rum or the raisins because it will affect the set, and you'll end up with a rum and raisin marmalade ice cream sauce, which isn't a bad thing to have, but, you know, wasn't perhaps what you were aiming for. So that's the ginger in the bottom of the jar, ready, like that. That. This recipe is sort of an all-purpose recipe, really, and it hasn't ever failed me, probably till today. So once you've made this a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, and you're comfortable with it, you can then, when you're cooking other types of citrus fruit, you'll be in a better position to start making adjustments and putting other things in or using different fruits. So I've got my jars here for the whiskey. To be honest, let's put it over there. What I usually do is I don't measure it as such, but I just put enough to cover the base of the jar, like that, no more, so that you don't end up ruining the set. But that's actually in there a little bit too soon, so I'll put the lid on, keep the whiskey fumes in there until we see how this is doing. So you can see all that foam has dispersed pretty much. There's some odd little bits and pieces, but I wouldn't worry about that. What's on the side of the pan, leave that there. Don't scoop it all up because that is cooked. That's hotter because the side of the pan is hotter. So it's cooked it there and it's sort of quite solid in places. So don't end up getting that scooped up into your marmalade because it will just float around on the top and look completely unpleasant. Right, let's go back. I don't know what's going to happen with this because it hasn't been there very long. But there we are on our saucer. It looks fairly good. You've got the meniscus there on the top, the surface tension. If you look here, it's not just spread out all loose across the saucer. It's stayed put and it's got a bit of a curve to it. So I'm going to use my little finger like we do with the jam, and I'm going to push this away from me to see what happens to this. Okay. So you can see there, nice crinkle. And if I lift that away, there's a bit of a gel on the surface. I can't do it twice because once you've disturbed it, it's disturbed. So that tells me that once the marmalade's in the jar, what you're doing now is replicating what's going to happen in the jar when the marmalade is cool and cold. You're just spreading out a thin layer which cools down quicker and tells you whether the chemical reaction that creates the gel has occurred, which it has. So we know that once this is in the jar and cooled down, it will do the same thing. So you need to leave it ready for 10 to 15 minutes at this point, which will allow the peel Again, it will be still blisteringly hot when you put it into the jar, but it's starting to gel, even though you can't see that, and it holds the peel in place. I'm going to put this in the jar now when it's too hot, really, and it's most likely going to float to the top. But ignore that. You're going to let yours cool adequately. I just want to go through the jar filling again so that we all are on the same page. Get my ladle, get my jar up to the pan so we don't get any drips anywhere. And make sure you get sort of even peel and juice. You know, don't put all the juice in the first jar because you won't have any left at the end. You'll just have peel. So fill until the marmalade just comes up to the top of the cup. The wider your jar, the more you can sort of squeeze in at the top, because you're only looking at a very tiny part of the surface there. As soon as I take the funnel out, it's going to spread out and be perfectly filled. I'll put a lid on, and Trevor and I won't worry if all the peel is at the top, because it won't matter. I'm not trying to sell it or anything. So I'm going to go on and do this one, seeing as it's here. Right, let's have one of my whiskey ones. Take the lid off. Funnel. You can smell the whiskey. Ladle in the marmalade as quickly as you can after you've put the whiskey in the jar. Smells amazing. And put the lid on straight away so that you keep all that whiskey in there. I've got to remember which are which now. Because I haven't got my labels ready. Right, same with this one. Use that peel so it's under the juice. And you can take a little bit more juice in the top of that one. Make sure it's filled right to the top, because it will shrink as it cools. So those are my two whiskey ones there. I'll put a lid on this other one. A little bit more in that one. What's that? Just plain. This is one of the ginger ones. So if you don't eat a great deal of marmalade, and who does these days really? I mean, we, you know, not as much as people used to, but it's a nice thing to have. But if you don't want the whole batch being ginger, or the, you know, you can do this sort of variety pack. Or if you wanted to do plain for yourself and your family, but make some gifts, then you can do the whiskey ones, and, you know, it's in your control. You don't have to make a whole batch of one thing and then a whole batch of another. It's right, let's see how that works out with the ginger. Nice and full right to the top. You can see the ginger is at the bottom of the jar there, but I'm going to sort of give it a bit of a shake round and put it on its lid for the moment. You need to be careful doing that sort of thing because, oh yeah, Trev just pointed out I've left the bag at the back and haven't put the juice in, but never mind. Question there about, no, I didn't do the drippings. And when you test for a set, just leave it to cool for 2 or 3 minutes. Don't do it straight away. It's got to have a chance to replicate cooling down the whole pan full. If you have tested it straight away, just get another saucer and do it, leave it again. And so here goes my second ginger jar. If you've put a jar upside down like that, just be careful tipping it around. You know, make sure when you pick it up, oops, that you put your hand under the lid because they don't actually seal tight until they're cool and that vacuum's formed and that holds it down tight onto the top of the jar. And if you go picking it up and expect it, you know, it can come off until that point. So just be careful doing that. I know a lot of people routinely tip their jars upside down. I don't, but I do sometimes with the ginger. Right. Just got a little bit more there. I'll probably put in a dish actually for me. Get the ginger down there. It depends. Is it Jill asking about the drippings? If you are still cooking it, then yeah, you can add it. I mean, I wouldn't put mine in now, but oh, sorry, Suzanne. But if you've still got to cook it for a while, then I wouldn't put them in because it's always the way, you know. You leave it and it because it needs to be kind of more or less the same stage as the actual pan, really. But if you'd only been cooking it for about 10 minutes, then it would be fine. Right, put a bit in there. That will be for my toast. So I hope that gives you kind of a broad base to start from. And once you've got sort of the hang of that and, you know, adding your other flavours in and so on, you can then move on to other types of citrus fruit and experiment and, you know, use the same sort of base, but just substitute the different fruits as you want to. Make sure if you look at the proportions there, we've got 750 grams and twice as much sugar, slightly more than twice as much water. By the time you've cooked the fruit, you've got down to the 750 grams of fruit and 1.5 litres of water and 1.5 kilos of sugar. And that's kind of the ratio. So you've got twice as much sugar and water as you've got fruit. So if you weigh your fruit, whatever you're going to use, whatever you're going to substitute, and then double up for the sugar, and double up for the water plus some for evaporation while you're cooking it to soften it. Okay. So how much sugar would I add to make it Oxford? Depends. If you're putting it into the pan, the whole pan's worth, Rachel, I would put a couple of good tablespoonfuls. If you're only doing like 2 jars worth, you'll probably just need like a dessert spoonful. You don't want to put too much again, because again, it's going to alter the chemistry of the whole thing. So you want to put enough to flavour it and colour it, and then, you know, just depends on the quantity you're adding it into. So, okay, Suzanne, yeah, just give it another sort of 5 minutes hard boil, and then test it again. I don't know if this is. You see, if I show you, can I show you this? Can you change the camera, Trev? This is now cold, and you can see it's very jellified, and that's what you're looking for. I do find it helps when you're doing the test if you put a bit of peel in as well. I don't know why, it just seems to replicate things better, but that's all going to be fine. Okay. Now, there's one thing I've got to remember to tell you. Not for next week. Next week we're doing the rhubarb and date chutney. I know the rhubarb isn't around yet, the fresh rhubarb, but I think we've all got bags of rhubarb in the freezer from last year, because people get fed up with using it and then they freeze it and think, oh, we'll have winter crumbles, and then they don't. And, you know, so if you've got bags of frozen rhubarb, then this is great to use that. If you haven't, maybe you've got a friend that's got some, or, you know, you can buy some frozen rhubarb. It's a lovely chutney to make at this time of year. This is what I try and do, is clear out the freezer a bit of all these sort of odd things that we never got round to, and then you're ahead of the game really for the year. But the thing I need to tell you is the week after, I think it is, when we're making the vin d'orange, you're going to need 2 Seville oranges for that. So if you've got some left that you've frozen for this, keep 2 back for that, and just take them out of the freezer beforehand. If you haven't, and you don't want to go and get 2 more, then you can use an orange and a small grapefruit. So a sweet orange and a small grapefruit. So don't panic. It's just if you have got a couple of Seville oranges, that's what it's traditionally made with. Okay. That's all the questions, I think. Just checking quickly. Make sure you've got it hot enough, Suzanne, when you're reboiling. It needs to be really, you know, fiercely boiling. Good. Good luck with that. If it still doesn't set, if you've got a lemon around, put some more lemon juice in and just get the acidity up a bit, and that will help. Okay. I hope that's helped. I hope it was clear, and that you go on and you're now marmalade makers, and it's not so daunting or difficult to do as doing it, you know, from the raw oranges and everything, and that you make some lovely variations. And I'll see you next week with your rhubarb. Okay, thank you.